So hello, everyone, and welcome to the University of the Underground. We are a free, pluralistic, transnational university and charity founded in 2017 in the basement of a nightclub in Amsterdam. I am Naum, the head of program of I Want to Believe, an investigation into religion and belief systems as a part of a 3-month practice-based residency where we are unraveling belief systems and the relationship with politics, economics, nation states, and society. I would like to welcome our participants, and also I would like to welcome any visiting participants. And if there's any of you around, I will kindly ask you to donate to our charity so we can keep running these programs. And this talk is going to be 40 minutes, and it's going to be followed by a 15-20-minute Q&A. So if you have any questions, just type them and I will call you at the end. And today I'm very excited to introduce you to Nicholas Campion, who happened to be someone I've been admiring for years and who opened my eyes to understand the role of astrology in society back in a couple of cosmic events that we had in the past. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nick Campion. He is the director of the Sophia Center for the Study of Cosmology in Culture. The only academic center in the world to deal with cultural relationships with the sky and the cosmos. He's responsible for taking forward the center's research and teaching activities through supervising PhD students, sponsoring research projects, organizing conferences and other events. He's also the program director of the Masters in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology. And he's the director of the Harmony Institute, working with Dr. Jane Davidson and Inspire and other staff across that university. So having said that, Nick, I would like to welcome you, and we're all yours.
Well, Naeem, thank you. It's amazing to be. I'm so glad you asked me. And for those of you who don't know, we collaborated 10 years ago on another cosmic project. So it's really great to reconnect. Now I've got a PowerPoint slide, so I'm going to share my screen and bring it up. And so if I can get it to the beginning, so that's fine. So I tend to load my PowerPoints full of text and have a lot of slides. So I'm going to run through quite a lot of material quite quickly, but I can send a PDF of the PowerPoint afterwards to Nahum, so that you know, if stuff flashes by, you can always go back and then consult the PDF afterwards. So oh gosh, astrology. I've been fascinated by astrology since I was a small child, and it just happened to become for me both a practice and a worldview. And then because I'm a sort of genetically academic, I can't stop thinking about what things are. It's not enough for me to do something. I constantly have to think about what I'm doing. So I became the sort of academic specialist in astrology, and I'm probably the only one who has a complete grasp on the whole of astrology in every culture. There are many other academics who specialize in different areas of the topic. And Most of what I'm going to be saying, but not all, is taken from various of my books. And in particular, for complete background, there's these 3 books I'm highlighting with my mouse. A two-volume history of Western astrology, and then a volume on astrology and cosmology in the world's religions. So, like everything, people argue about what astrology is, and it's a feature of our society, isn't it? The people argue about science, religion, and so on. They very rarely bother to say what they mean by these words. So here's a typical definition of astrology from the Encyclopedia Britannica: type of divination that consists in interpreting the influence of planets and stars in order to predict or affect the destinies of individuals, groups, or nations. So I've highlighted in bold there various sort of powerful words. Influence, as if we are all directly influenced by the stars. Predict, as if we can see the future. Destiny, as if there's a destiny waiting. But also divination. And divination is becoming quite fashionable amongst anthropologists, because it used to have a hang-up, and it was considered that there had to be a divinity to communicate with in divination. But the term divinity has largely been replaced by non-human other. So a much more general phrase. So what's a non-human other? Could be a tree, a stone, an animal, a cloud, an intangible intelligence, a consciousness, anything. And so in divination, in many cultures, the diviner may be communicating with all sorts of physical objects, alive in different ways. This is a inclusive definition. It's from Patrick Curry, who said astrology is the practice of relating the heavenly bodies to lives and events on Earth and the tradition that has thus been generated. So it's a very value-free definition here. It's a practice. And so the whole, the subject of this lecture series is belief. And there's a whole debate within the study of religions as to whether, when you're looking at religions, you focus on belief or practice, what people think or what they do, which leads the process. So he focused on practice. So, just to locate astrology culturally, it had, a fashionable vogue in the 1960s and 70s, when it was part of hippie culture. There's this is on the left from a book by a journalist called Duncan Campbell, writing a novel about people traveling to India and Afghanistan in the 60s and 70s. For people from such secular backgrounds, they were strangely superstitious, asking each other what their signs were and nodding knowingly, as if being a Leo or a Capricorn carried some special cachet. I remember this very well from when I was about 18 and started traveling and meeting people who would say, what's your sign? And I'd tell them, and there'd be a sort of nod like this and an intake of breath. And this was the common discourse. And there, in fact, is Mick Jagger on the right in 1969, wearing a T-shirt with Leo on the front, where the sun was when he was born. And so what message is he conveying? Well, back then, for anybody who understood the symbol, oh, here's Mick Jagger, king of the jungle. Right now, there's a huge journalistic interest in the supposed popularity of astrology amongst millennials. I just looked these things up today because I'm never quite sure what a millennial is or what a Gen Z is or what anything. But anyway, millennials 1981 to 96, and Gen Z or Gen Z, as Americans say, 1995 to 2008. I think these are very, obviously very arbitrary distinctions. But nevertheless, journalists at the moment, and for the last 2.5 years, have been extremely excited by the idea that millennials are so into astrology. This was the first such article here on the right-hand side. Why are millennials so into astrology? From the Atlantic. I'm actually quoted in this article, and I'm saying, well, who says they are? How do we know? Because nobody's ever asked them. All the evidence is anecdotal. And clearly technology has an effect on the way people use astrology, because since social media, since the web, it's possible to engage with it in a far more detailed way. And then Gen Z, 1995, 2008, also supposed to be into astrology. I think that's Billie Eilish there. Anyway, the idea that people are supposed to be into astrology is born of an idea that the world is in a state of change and flux, and everybody's insecure. And when people are insecure, they turn to astrology. But that's just an idea. It's just a theory. There's nothing to actually demonstrate that that's the case. This is all just one journalist, one media outlet feeding on another. So I did do some research. I wrote my PhD on belief in astrology in the late 90s. And so these are the kind of figures you get quoted often in the media from Gallup polls. Do you believe in horoscopes? In 1975, 14% yes, that's British adults, and 20% in 1978. 1975 here, do you believe in astrology or not? 22% said yes, they believe. So you get these figures. So if you see figures quoted in the media for belief in astrology, they're always around 25% of adults. But actually, you can see these questions are nonsense, because how do you get anybody to answer a quantitative question saying with a single answer, and it's a yes or no question like this one? And up the top here, do you believe in horoscopes? Well, what are you asking me? Do I believe they exist or what? Now, quantitative data is extremely inaccurate frequently, particularly around matters of belief, because belief carries a certain amount of embarrassment. There's a prevailing assumption in Western culture that if you believe something, you are slightly stupid, because belief is supposed to be opposite to knowledge, and knowledge is based on evidence, and belief is based on superstition. This is a frequent, this is a discourse promoted heavily by scientists. But the discourse is actually nonsense. The whole premise doesn't make sense, because what believe means in English and in the equivalents in Greek and Latin going way back means just have confidence in something. So scientists can believe in their scientific data and so on. But if you ask people whether they believe something, they're more likely to say no, particularly if it's something slightly odd. Do you believe Joe Biden is president of the USA? Yes, people say yes. But if you ask, do you believe in UFOs? People will be more inclined to say no, because they're aware it's odd. So what you need to do is talk to people. And so I also spoke to people in my research, and you do. And so I took as my starting point some of the differences in quantitative data. So here there was research published as long ago as 1977 saying 70% of the adult population read horoscopes, but only 20% believe there's something in it. And that sounds to me inherently unlikely. Why do 50% of people spend their time reading something they think is worthless? Why don't they read the fashion pages or the sports pages or the celebrity gossip. People think celebrity gossip is important, sport is important, fashion is important. If people read something, they think there's something in it. And so the figure for people who accept there's some validity in astrology usually works out about 70%. And I think it would be much higher because when you, as I said, when you talk to people who are overtly skeptical because they're Westerners, they will often admit to all sorts of attitudes. So, for example, because most people have weird experiences to start with. Having a weird experience is part of being human. And also, as regarding questions about belief, I asked study of religion students for their religious affiliation, and 25% chose spiritual. But when I asked them if they were spiritual people, 67% agreed. And so you can see that it's tremendously difficult to find out what attitudes to astrology are in our society. So anyway, the language of astrology. This is very familiar. These are images from the web. The standard language is that of the birth signs, the sun sign containing an individual's sun at birth. And for me, I often assume the appeal of astrology is based on the fact that it is the single most accessible psychological system. There's nothing else like it. From knowing your date of birth, you can get a psychological profile. And there's 12 varieties. There is no equivalent in the rest of the world of popular psychology. Now, the language extends, so each zodiac sign here from Aries to Pisces has a set of descriptions, which is summed up in this particular diagram as a keyword. And with here, Aries I am, Taurus I have, and so on, as one person's opinion. But these descriptions can become voluminous. On the right-hand side here, this is from Jonathan Kaner, who was one of the most famous British horoscope columnists. He's now dead. But I want just to show you the language he's using. Right, and just to pick on Leo, to continue with Leo on the left-hand side here, the cavalry are riding to your rescue. Sadly, they cannot reach your beleaguered fortress because there are access issues over the road. I mean, Jonathan was by far and away the most popular astrologer in Britain, and one of the most across the English-speaking world when he died about 10 years ago. And he would, and why? Because he would communicate in this way. Now, he didn't need astrology to write this. But this communicated, for people, this was astrology, and people would read him devotedly every day. And in India, it's the same. Often when we talk about astrology, all the conversations in the West we have are about Western astrology. But in India, there's an unbroken tradition going back 2,000 years in its current form, where astrology is just a standard part of modern life. It's also part of action, it's part of behavior, right? So on the right-hand side here, this diagram is of the 9 planets of Indian astrology, the so-called grahas. This is a Navagraha diagram then, 9 planets. And Hindu temples, many of them, contain shrines to the 9 planets. And so depending on what your astrologer has told you, then you will go along to the Navagraha shrine, where a priest can perform a puja, a purification ritual, and if there's a difficult planetary indication, it can be mitigated. And so astrology then becomes an active way of engaging with the wider cosmos. And it's a way of engaging with time. This is all to do with time. So the more complicated level of astrology beyond the birth signs is the horoscope. Right? I've shown you two examples here, which I like because they're both drawn by famous people. This one on the left here is drawn by the astronomer Galileo for his daughter Virginia. He cast his daughter's horoscopes. On the right-hand side there, this is cast by the founder of Surrealism, André Breton, for the Surrealist poet Paul Eluard. As amongst the Surrealists, there's quite a current of interest in astrology. If you know how to do it, these are simpler to interpret than they look. If you can read these hieroglyphs, it's like reading a musical score if you're a musician. So what the astrologers look at then is the planets, of which in astrology there are 10, the zodiac signs, of which there are 12, and the planets and the zodiac signs each have a character, and then the houses, which are these divisions here, signify areas of life, family, travel, money, and so on. So the astrologer will look at the distances between the planets, then add optional extras like stars, asteroids, symbolic measures, derivative horoscopes. You can take a horoscope and calculate other horoscopes out of it, which could never actually exist astronomically. And the permutations are in effect infinite. So on the surface, astrology is a matter of locating the individual in time. But once you begin to work with it, it moves deeply into the realm of symbol and the imaginal. If you haven't heard that term imaginal, it is a term used to describe the world that some people in classical philosophy exist between our world and a world of consciousness beyond our world. And the imaginal is a membrane between the two that some people say you enter in astrological work. So typologies of astrology then comes in many forms, and it's good. This is an interesting distinction, not watertight. Judicial astrology, these distinctions go back 1500 years at least. Okay, the astrologer has to reach a judgment. So there's no astrology without the astrologer. The astrologer's statement is vital to the process. And then we've got natural astrology, natural influences, seasonal cycles, daily rhythms. You know, more and more medical evidence comes out about the importance of circadian rhythms. Those are daily rhythms, which obviously are hinged around the rotation of the Earth in relation to the sun, and their lunar rhythms as well. And there's also 4 traditional branches of astrology in the classical, Islamic, Indian, and Western system, right? And so astrologers would distinguish these. They may not always be visible at all to clients of astrologers, but horoscopes cast for birth, natal astrology, mundane astrology, from the Latin mundus, the world, so looking at political and collective affairs. Horary astrology, very interesting example. You would go to an astrologer and ask a question, and the time you ask the question contains the answer to the question. So the astrologer would do the chart for the question, the horoscope, as we saw. Now, in the days before people knew when they were born, this was the most common form of astrology. You'd go to the astrologer, and the astrologer wouldn't say when you were born because he didn't know. The astrologer would cast the horoscope the moment you asked a question. And then electional astrology, choosing auspicious beneficial moments. So, and then we get all these, and electional astrology, very important in many cultures. The time that the state of Sri Lanka became a republic was chosen by the government's astrologers. The time that Myanmar in Southeast Asia, or formerly Burma, became independent was chosen by the astrologers. clearly not very successfully in the latter case. So we'll get all these descriptions to describe astrology, right? Science, divine science, pseudoscience, art, mantic art, psychological tool, language, symbolic language, divination, religion, quasi-religion, magic. I always get confused when I see some of these terms as to how a quasi-religion differs from a religion. That I would say is nonsense. And also, if you look at science and pseudoscience, it's a binary distinction, but it's very difficult to distinguish, to demarcate where science ends and pseudoscience begins. Advocates of this system think it's very simple, but actually it breaks down when you look very closely. And then we get other kinds of descriptions of astrology used by astrologers. Let me just highlight this. Psychological, the dominant mode of astrology in the Western world, to do with self-analysis and psychological description. So the relationship between astrology and astronomy, quite simply, very simple. Astronomy is the law of the stars, from which we get English words like from the Greek word for law, normative and normal. And astrology, astrologos, is the word or logic of the stars. And these two terms were interchangeable until the 17th century. And so it's only in the modern world that they are separate. In modern Western culture, and in most cultures, they were never separate because it was considered pointless to look at the positions of the stars to measure them and see where they were, as opposed to interpreting their significance. And astronomers get very agitated about this, very angry, and partly because a lot of people mistake the two and ask astronomers to cast horoscopes for them, and the astronomers get deeply insulted. There's a culture war between astronomers and astrologers. So social and political contexts then. So 25% or 75% of the adult population believe in astrology, depending on how the question is asked, but it's widely regarded as being an anachronistic survival of a superstitious past. So many sociologists and psychologists spend quite a bit of time trying to work out why people believe in astrology. But the question goes away if you stop thinking that astrology has to be an anachronistic survival from a superstitious past. So Theodor Adorno on the left here, who was a very important Marxist Freudian philosopher, hated astrology. He saw it as a basis for fascism, and he said astrology is basically discordant with today's universal state of enlightenment. A neutral position over here on the right from Clive Ruggles, a physicist and archaeologist, to modern astrology is anathema. And from Percy Seymour here, he said, the continuing hold of astrology on the human psyche is curious, but, the hold of it on the human psyche. So the point is, people are supposed to be somehow normal and not accept this stuff. It's part of general culture, global culture in the Americas. Steve McCluskey at the top here saying that Mesoamerican cosmology didn't exist without astrology. Antiavini here saying the Mayan astronomical texts were purely astrological in their function and intent. And the prime principle is interconnectedness, right? Everything is interconnected. Nothing is separate. Everything is interconnected. And that does mean everything. So how do we describe what astrologers do? This is an account of modern Western astrology. So this is from Katerina Genzi, who studied this. She said astrology deals with two levels of reality, right? where things are, which is somehow the real world, and where things seem to be, which is how we experience them. And she's saying that astrology then fills the gap in between our experience of the weird and the world as it is supposed to exist. And so we also get traditions in native North America. So here we have certain stars because of their colors portraying the spirits. So the star Aldebaran, which is not a planet, it's a bright star, represents red wolf or wolfman. Old woman is represented by the white star Sirius, which you'll have seen in the sky, even if you don't know it, because it's so bright. And these identifications then become part of rituals which are associated with the sky and help harmonize life on the planet. China as well. I think most people are familiar with the animal signs of Chinese astrology, but the Chinese also had an official form of astrology in which the whole of the country was a mirror of the sky and vice versa. And so by looking at the sky, the astrologers directed the emperor as to what to do. And then, of course, the 12 animal signs now pervade Western culture. Every town with a Chinese restaurant has a Chinese New Year. So then we have astrological magic and types of magic. So how do we engage with the stars magically? The two main ideas are that there's a sympathy between us and the stars. The sympathy is like an essence. It's a substance that pervades the universe, and each object has a different kind of sympathy. And so we can work with those sympathies. So if you want to evoke the planet Mars, which is the red planet, and an energetic planet, you would wear red. And if you wanted to damp down that sympathy, you would wear blue, color of Venus. Or ritual magic, where you enact out the positions of the stars symbolically. Here's a couple of examples of astrological magic. I'm only going to look at the one on the left. Carve a picture on a stone of Besawa in the hour of the moon. So while the sun is in the first degree of it, and the ascendant is in Leo Aquarius, mount the stone on a golden ring, stamp it with resin of Kundor in the designated hour, and with the moon in Scorpio, give the bitten person a dose of it, and he will be cured of his scorpion sting. That, in fact, is extraordinarily impractical. If you tried to wait for the right conditions there to heal the person of the scorpion sting, they would be dead. But on the right-hand side here, from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn from 1900, there's an account for a magical ritual. We sat in a semicircle at the north side of the altar, facing the south, when Mars was in Virgo at the time. Deodate, who's leading the ritual, made the invoking hexagrams of Mars around the room, and the pentagram of Virgo and Mars symbol towards the south. And then the ritual was ready to begin, and the participants hoped to travel psychically to the stars. Now, everything is bound together by sympathy and tension. I'm just going to show you very quickly a couple of images. These are from the occult philosophy of Henry Cornelius Agrippa. So what in the Middle Ages people did was they took every conceivable thing and produced diagrams like this, where you could have horizontal and vertical patterns. So here the sun, here the moon, here water, here the earth, the heart, the brain, and so link everything up. And so you could then manipulate these sympathies by understanding the diagram. Here's a more complicated example. Here's the 12 signs of the zodiac. Here's 12 stones. And you could then use those stones for zodiacal matters. Here's this idea written out in text. So we've got, this is the planet Saturn. This is how detailed it could get. All impediments in the right ear, I'm highlighting this with my mouse, teeth, and all quartan aches proceeding of cold and dry. So it becomes incredibly detailed. Now, I'm going to, just to say, Nahum, I'm getting a little short on time. I'm sure you're watching the time, so I'm going to run a couple of minutes over.
Sure.
But I'm aware of the time. So I'm going to switch track here slightly. Okay, this is Plato. These are two of the foundation statements of Western astrology. First of all, they're from his work, the Timaeus, written in the, I think around the 380s BCE. This is the creator. Think of the creator as a divine consciousness. He made an eternal image moving according to number, even that which we have named time. So there's time. And then the planets come into existence for the determining and preserving the numbers of time. It's got this time-based system. So then the Persian astrologers came along probably from the 2nd century onwards, and decided that the movements of the two superior planets, that's the two planets that were slowest moving from their perspective, Jupiter and Saturn, represented the rise and fall of kingdoms and religions. This notion was picked up by Johannes Kepler, who said that this whole system works because the whole universe is part of a single geometrical system and it's all psychically connected, which is, by the way, what most people accepted at the time anyway, so that your own consciousness is linked to the consciousness of the world and the consciousness of all things. So Kepler set out a system whereby ideas, consciousness manifests as the planets move, and through this repetition, you can predict future events by looking back at the past. So he made predictions for May 1618, where he noticed very difficult alignments in Taurus. He looked at the last similar events here and saw that there were important revolts. And so he forecast something similar for May 1618. It so happens that in May 1618, the 30 Years' War broke out in Europe, which was a major European war on the scale of the First or Second World Wars. Every European country was involved. I actually count that as a successful prediction for Kepler. This method has been used successfully as well by other people. So this is from an article in the British Astrological Journal from 1980, looking at the situation in the Soviet Union. This man is called Michael Bagent. Planetary transits from 1989 to 91 suggest some basic restructuring of the USSR, a change for the nation with regard to leadership and style, and some new revolution in Russia, which would restructure the country dramatically. The country will collapse back into numerous autonomous states it once was. Nobody else predicted this. This is about as unambiguous prediction of the breakup of the Soviet Union you could find 10 years in advance. So the theory of method of planetary cycles, everything is interconnected. This is fundamental, by the way, to all indigenous cultures. Everything is interconnected. Now, I'm going to finish up with just two things. It's going to take me a few more minutes. This man here is an astrologer called André Barbeau, who died about 6 months ago at the age of 100. I'm going to explain this to you very quickly. He took the 5 outer planets in astrology, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. He put them in pairs, and he worked out the distance between each pair at any one moment in time. And then you add up all the pairs. And so we've got, what's it here? We've got 10 pairs, and you get a figure. You add up the distance in degrees, like here 659, 1979, 1983, 300. And then he worked out this thing, right? So you get a graph. And he worked out what he called the cyclical planetary index. And so you can look at this. And so on this basis, Barbo said when you got a top point, a point of relaxation, and a bottom point, a point of tension. And so here, at this point on this descent here, Barbo said there's a chance of a third world war, right? Massively increased tension there was, came to an end when Mikhail Gorbachev came out of the Soviet Union. There's a relaxation here, the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And so Barbo said 1981 to 84 promises to be the third black spot of the century. There was no nuclear war, but there was paranoia, which I remember well, from 1979 to 85, a huge fear of war, which resulted in things like the famous Greenham Common peace camp in England and similar developments across France, Germany, the USA. So if we look at the cyclical index for 2000 to 2100, this is how Barbo filled in the points. So up here at this peak, the Twin Towers attack, the Arab Spring here, the global financial crash here, and he predicted this 2020 here, the COVID crisis. And I've I've missed out the slide where he made the prediction. He made the prediction in 2011 in a French magazine called L'Astrologue, and he said that there will be a global pandemic in 2020. And he did that not just on the basis of his cyclical index, but by looking back to previous pandemics. So I'm going to finish up with a little bit of theory. These two French thinkers here, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, come up with the idea of rhizome theory. Rhizome, so a rhizome is like a plant which sends shoots out right through the soil. And so Deleuze and Guattari are saying if we have a model of a tree, for example, that's very hierarchical. Branches, roots at the bottom, a branch, and then trunk, then branches. They're saying a much better model for looking at society is those sorts of plants, actually like potatoes, mushrooms, which send shoots out right through the soil. So there is no center. And these things in rhizome are called biology. These things in biology are called rhizomes, right? So everything is interconnected non-hierarchically. So on the left, that's two images of rhizomes here and here that I picked off the web. So you get the idea. There is no center. And from this, they developed the idea of assemblages, right? So every single thing is an assemblage, right? So I've got, a book here. Well, I don't know. I've got a Cosmical leaflet here. This Cosmical leaflet is an assemblage, right? This is from, I think, 2011. Piece of paper with ink on it. This is the result of a huge amount of thought by people. It's a result of the invention of paper, the ability to print, the ideas that are contained. In terms of the people who are involved, those people wouldn't be here without their parents, and so on. Everything is interconnected, so everything's an assemblage. I find for me, this is the way I'm thinking at the moment. It's very liberating, completely non-hierarchical. And so I'm now thinking astrology is an assemblage. If we take those diagrams of sympathies and so on and interconnections, we got the words of astrologers. They're speaking through horoscope columns on the media and the web, on Instagram, everywhere. We've got no center, and we've got sort of multiple multiple connections that actually have no limits and no boundaries. I'm going to finish here with a quote from popular culture. This is from a British detective series called Morse, and they're tracking down a murderer. And the junior detective said, "Oh, his star sign." She talks about his star sign. And Morse, the senior detective, says, "There's your motive then. He murders everyone who asks him what his sign is. I like him better already." So that's a sort of antidote to thinking everything is wonderful. Astrology is just a human thing. There's my books again, and I'll stop sharing, and then we go.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry I ran over a bit there.
Yeah, so let's go straight away with questions because there are a few. So let's start with Chloe.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask if you could speak a bit more about stones as a material, and why stones seem to be used so much for kind of astrology and also like spiritual practices. Is it connection to the earth, because perhaps they're the same materials that are also connected to the stars? Or...
Did you say stones?
Stones, yeah.
S-T-O-N-E-S. Well, look, they're physical, aren't they? And you can hold them. You know, they're tangible. So if you look at other beings ruled by astrology, you've got animals. You know, each astrology sign has an animal and a bird. Well, you can't control them. A stone is easy to mold. You know, we also have metals like gold and silver, easy to mold. And so, you know, in astral magic, you can make a ring or a pendant or something containing the stone. So I think it's utility, really. It's that it's I think you put your finger on it, really. It's convenience. I'm just thinking, I've got various stones on my I'm just going to leave the screen a minute. I'm going to get because these are my stones. I'm just going to show you my stones. So, you know, these are not astrological, although of course everything is interconnected. They're rhizomes. So this here, I picked this up. I was on a walk, a particular planetary aspect through the Stone Age landscape of southern England around the great sites of Avebury and Silbury. This looked to me like a goddess holding her baby. There's the goddess's head, there's her arm, and there's the baby. So typical, like, could be Isis and Horus or Madonna and Child. And here, as you're in Berlin, here's a bit of Berlin Wall I picked up on New Year 1990, which is a sort of sacred object for me because it represents that moment in time.
Thank you for sharing that.
Excellent. Then we go with Jamal.
Yes, thank you very much, and also thank you for this lovely presentation. And excuse me if maybe you already referred to it, but yes, I wanted to ask, what is your take on?
We cannot hear you, Jamal. For some reason, your audio dropped.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Now? Okay. Yes. Excuse me. So, what is your take on the claim that Christianity actually could be derived from ancient astrology? Because there's so many, different references to it. For example, the three kings announcing Jesus' birth, which is actually the three kings of Orion, and that halo that Jesus is wearing around his head is actually the zodiac circle.
I think that there's sort of multiple answers to that question. I think that Christianity is the result of sort of multiple lines of transmission, and then in its origins, but clearly what happened was that you've got influences coming in to mold early Christianity. So let's just think of a few of them, and obviously some of them are brought in later, and so and it's difficult to also say exactly when Christianity started. However, if we look at Jewish tradition, then there were Jewish traditions of a sort of sacred astrology, or a calendar astrology, we might say, around the time. So use of the number 12. So the use of the idea of 12 disciples is clearly a calendar symbol. And then later on, particularly under Roman influence, Jesus becomes equated with the sun god, who's the central god of the Roman imperial cult. So, the Emperor Constantine in the 300s marries the two, brings on Christianity as unifying force for the Roman Empire, and legitimizes it by making Jesus, in effect, the sun god. I saw this very strongly in Peru. I went to mass in the cathedral in Lima, and you really see there the way in which Christianity can be a solar religion. But yes, there's lots of it, and then Christians, a lot of them, come very uncomfortable with astrology because they see it as a rival. And the solution that was worked out in the medieval world is that the stars influence the body, but the soul's responsible only to God. So the stars can't influence the soul. That was a solution in medieval theology. But yeah, your point is well taken.
Perfect. Next is David.
Okay, so there's two questions. One is maybe fast. I'd like to ask again about the term imaginal, because I have only heard it once in while talking about butterflies, and it's these groups of cells that contain the information for the structure of the future being. But this is the first time I heard it in the astronomical, astrological term. The second question is about astrology, astronomy, and the Mayan calendar. If you have any input in it, I had some experiences about that were very explosive in my head, but I wanted to know your input about that.
Sorry, did you say the Mayan calendar? Yeah. Okay, so first off, imaginal. The term was used by a French scholar of Islamic and Arabic culture called Henri Corbin. And Corbin is spelled Corbin. And if you Google him, you'll find some of his work online. And so that was his way of saying that, of challenging the idea that things which are imaginary are not real. And one way in which people talk about the realm of ideas in classical philosophy or archetypes is that they're also images. And so Corbin used that word imaginal as to describe the realm of which images from the realm of consciousness enter our realm. And as far as the Mayan calendar is concerned, I'm not sure. I know that I like the fact that it never died out, and what we've got today in the Mayan calendar is a direct heir to the practices which the Maya had when the Spanish arrived. But apart from that, I know some of the basics, but it's never really gripped me. Somehow it doesn't quite, you know, I could just, it doesn't quite make sense to me. I like the fact it's there, but I don't really have anything else that I can say about it. You know, sometimes little, you know, ideas or images, they switch something on in your brain and the light bulb goes on. You know, Indian astrology does that for me, but the Mayan stuff just doesn't. It's just to do with the way I'm wired, I suppose.
Gracias. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I know there are more questions, but maybe it's time to wrap up. But Nick, is there a way? I mean, the students will be developing some projects in the next couple of months. I wonder if they have any questions. How can they reach you?
They can. You can give them my email.
Okay.
Naomi. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay. So there's not even a final. I mean, if there are any more questions, I know you have to end, but
yes, I mean, because our next lecturer is here, Carmel, and I don't want to steal a lot of her time. Yeah, but I mean, we could be here for such a long time.
You could invite me back.
Okay, we can explore that. Yeah, if there's consensus, we can do that, and that'll be lovely.
Or the year after, sometime.
Yes,
Anytime.
Totally. So Nick, I would like to thank you so much for participating in this program. I'm a big fan of your work, and I really appreciate how you opened my mind to understand astrology as someone who works in space exploration. So I appreciate that you were here today with us, and thank you so much. So round of applause. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.